50,000 Roman soldiers die in a single afternoon. Not over the course of a grinding war, not through the slow attrition of siege or famine, but in a few blood-soaked hours beneath a summer sun that scorches flesh and earth alike. It remains the most lethal day in military history, a moment when Western civilization teeters on the edge of extinction. Blood pools ankle-deep on Italian soil, soaking into the earth as Roman screams fill the air, their final prayers lost in the thunder of foreign war cries. What kind of commander orchestrates such calculated slaughter? What fusion of tactical genius, burning vengeance, and iron resolve brings empires to their knees? This is the story of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who carved his name into Roman nightmares for generations. Today, we descend into the chaos of Cannae, where the very air thickens with the metallic taste of blood and fear, where we witness the deadliest afternoon in the history of warfare. Not merely to remember these fallen thousands, but to understand how one man's brilliance transformed a battlefield into a slaughterhouse, and why the echoes of that savage day still resonate through our military and cultural consciousness 2 millennia later. 2 centuries before this bloodbath, Rome ascends through methodical conquest, a republic engineered not merely to survive, but to dominate. Its legionaries are more than men with weapons. They are living components of a war machine without equal in the ancient world. Each trains to march until feet crack and bleed, to thrust short swords with surgical precision rather than wild slashes, to kill with brutal efficiency. Fear is not merely conquered, but systematically extracted from their souls. In the scorching summer of 216 BCE, 80,000 Roman soldiers advanced toward Hannibal, moving with the inevitability of an avalanche, their formation a manifestation of Rome's overwhelming might. Senators march alongside common soldiers, not as political observers, but as warriors themselves, teeth bared in anticipation of victory. Their confidence is absolute, for what can one Carthaginian general do? Stranded deep in Italian territory, his supplies dwindling, his allies uncertain, his army outnumbered. Beneath their gleaming armor and unwavering certainty lurks the deadliest of military sins, arrogance, blinding them to what awaits on the sun-scorched plain outside an insignificant village called Cannae. For this day will not witness Hannibal's destruction as Rome intends. It will instead mark the moment when a foreign general transcends mortality to become legend. And yet, Hannibal should never have existed. He is born not into privilege, but into hatred, into a family whose blood courses with vengeance against Rome. His father, Hannibal Barca, makes him swear an oath as a 9-year-old boy, his small hands pressed into sacrificial flames as he vows Carthage will never kneel again. The child Hannibal watches Roman ships burn Carthaginian ports during the First Punic War, sees his people's empire crumble under humiliating terms of surrender, his young heart hardening with a fury colder than steel. But Hannibal does not transform into an undisciplined beast of rage. He evolves into something far more terrifying, a methodical, brilliant, patient strategist whose mind is honed by hardship and exile. In the mountains of Iberia, he learns to read terrain as intimately as others read lovers' bodies, masters more languages than his enemies suspect exist, and views soldiers not as expendable numbers, but as instruments in perfect, lethal harmony. His face grows sharp and unyielding, eyes dark with a quiet intelligence that unnerves even his closest allies. He rides at the front, bleeds alongside his men, drinks the same brackish water, endures identical privations. They follow him not from fear of punishment, but from something rarer, absolute belief. For Hannibal understands what few commanders ever grasp. The battlefield is not merely a place where men die. It is a language of position, momentum, and psychological manipulation. And on the sun-baked plains of southern Italy, Hannibal Barca is about to speak this language so fluently that history itself will tremble. The Roman Republic does not face Hannibal blindly. They have tasted his bitter genius, suffered crushing defeats at Ticinus and Trebia, and most devastatingly, watched entire legions vanish in the morning mists at Lake Trasimene, where thousands of Roman throats were opened before their battle cries could even form. Yet Rome's response remained stubbornly unchanged, believing with religious conviction that overwhelming force must inevitably triumph over cunning. At Cannae, consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro arrive commanding the largest army Rome has ever assembled, swollen with conscripts, citizens, untrained volunteers, their breaths coming quick with anticipation, sweat already soaking their armor in the Italian heat. Varro, a butcher's son risen to power on populist promises, burns with ambition, his judgment clouded by visions of personal glory when he seizes command on the fateful morning. His order comes without hesitation, a single word that condemns thousands: advance. 80,000 Roman infantry surge forward like a living tide of iron and flesh, their rectangular formation an unstoppable bulwark in previous conquests. But Hannibal observes this predictable Roman arrogance with cold satisfaction. His warriors stand arranged, not for brute strength, but lethal adaptation, a crescent of Gauls and Iberians deliberately positioned to bow inward toward the advancing Romans, while his African veterans, men who have killed without mercy across a decade of continental warfare, wait at the wings in calculated silence, muscles coiled, breath steady. Behind them all, hidden from Roman eyes, Hannibal's cavalry commanders grip their reins with white-knuckled anticipation, thousands of horsemen poised like drawn daggers. What Rome perceives as weakness is carefully crafted bait. What they see as imminent victory is a door swinging open to slaughter. The Republic marches forward into what they believe will be a war of honor and courage. Instead, they walk into the jaws of the most perfectly orchestrated trap in military history. It begins with dust, a fine haze kicked up by 80,000 armored feet, blurring the horizon, stinging eyes, coating tongues with the taste of dried earth. The sun, already merciless, glares down like a molten eye, baking metal until it brands flesh through leather, turning armor into instruments of torture against those who wear them. Roman soldiers push forward, their columns thickening, men pressed shoulder to shoulder in suffocating density, rank upon rank of glinting helms and raised shields, their breathing already labored in the crushing press. Drums thunder, a sound meant to intimidate, but it is Hannibal's calculated silence that dominates the battlefield. His center yields intentionally. Gauls and Iberians feigning collapse with breathless realism, their apparent weakness drawing Roman infantry deeper into the center of the crescent, like prey into a spider's web. The Roman front swells with dangerous confidence, pressing harder, pouring into the gap like water into a drain, each step taking them further from salvation. Behind them, the trap tightens with terrible elegance. Hannibal's elite African infantry pivot inwards, their formation shifting with brutal precision, transforming the flanks into merciless pincers. The Roman vanguard, now locked in combat with the faltering enemy ahead, fails to register the sideways pressure mounting at the edges until panic flashes through their ranks. Then, with bone-rattling roars that send tremors through the earth itself, Hannibal's heavy cavalry smashes into the Roman rear, scattering their supporting horsemen and swinging round with terrifying speed to seal the final escape route. Within moments, 80,000 men are compressed into a shrinking circle of flesh and desperation. There is no room to swing swords, no space to lift shields, no air to breathe as men die standing, unable even to fall. Romans who had never contemplated defeat now feel their bodies crushed by their own compatriots, weapons rendered useless in the press of humanity. Inside this circle, death is not swift but savage and slow, methodical like the man who designed it. Blood seeps outward from the human mass, soaking into Italian soil as the afternoon sun watches impassively. And Hannibal, serene and still amid the chaos, observes a generation of Roman fathers, sons, and senators vanish beneath his will, beneath the weight of a mind honed for this singular purpose, to break Rome not through brute force, but through perfect, terrible brilliance. By the time the sun reaches its zenith, the battlefield has transformed into an abattoir beyond human comprehension. Roman cries diminished to desperate gurgles, then suffocating silence. Corpses stack in grotesque layers, limbs twisted into impossible configurations, eyes frozen wide with final terror, mouths still formed around prayers that died with them. The air thickens with the stench of blood and excrement, of punctured organs and voided bowels, of sweat-soaked leather cooking beneath the merciless sun. Vultures circle prematurely, their ancient instinct for carnage outpaced only by Hannibal's calculated design. When the final Roman formation disintegrates, when nothing remains but isolated clusters of men weeping beneath mountains of their fallen brothers, Hannibal offers no triumphant speech, no theatrical gesture of victory. He simply rides the perimeter, his expression contemplative, almost detached, as if his mind already races toward the next confrontation in a campaign barely begun. Of the 80,000 Romans who marched proudly onto these fields, fewer than 10,000 will ever return home. Thousands more are captured, their spirits shattered more thoroughly than their bodies. Survivors whisper that the Tiber flows crimson for days afterward, carrying Roman blood back to the very heart of the Republic. Yet the true current of this day runs deeper, surging beneath the marble floors of the Senate, infiltrating Roman nightmares, seeping into military doctrine for centuries to come across continents. Hannibal's massacre at Cannae carves more than a battlefield victory. It inflicts a psychological wound so profound in the Roman consciousness that it will transform their identity, their politics, their imperial ambitions, and ultimately their vengeance. The deadliest afternoon in military history does not end when weapons lower or when the counting of the dead concludes. It ends only when Rome begins the terrible process of remaking itself in the shadow of the man who nearly destroyed it completely. But the legacy of Cannae does not rest beneath its sun-baked soil. It pulses through the veins of military doctrine, echoes in war colleges where tacticians still trace its formations with reverent fingers. Rome, humiliated and drenched in its own blood, refuses extinction. It transforms. In the aftermath of slaughter, Fabius Maximus emerges with his strategy of calculated avoidance, refusing the direct confrontation Hannibal craves, scorching fields, poisoning wells, starving the invader of the decisive battle he needs. The Republic learns to fight Hannibal not with overwhelming numbers, but with something far more potent, his own weapon of strategic patience. Scipio Africanus rises from this catastrophe, not broken, but reborn, studying Cannae not as a tragedy, but as sacred text. At Zama in 202 BCE, he turns Hannibal's own brilliance against him, crafting a mirror image of the master's tactics, completing a circle of vengeance 16 years in the making. Yet centuries after Carthage burns and salt scars its soil, after Rome conquers continents and builds monuments celebrating triumph, it is Hannibal whose name commanders whisper with mingled dread and admiration. For what unfolded at Cannae transcended mere battle. Beyond victory or defeat, it was the moment when one man proved that intellect could devastate empire, that genius could annihilate brute force, that nations could crumble on the fulcrum of a single afternoon. Today, Roman helmets still lie buried in Italian earth, skulls within them crushed not merely by Carthaginian weapons, but by the unbearable weight of recognition in their final moments, the horrifying clarity that they never stood a chance against the perfect storm of Hannibal's mind. And what of Hannibal? He does not bask in glory, nor rest upon laurels. In the years that follow, he remains undefeated on Italian soil, yet victory never crystallizes into ultimate triumph. Rome adapts, learns, evolves into something more resilient, more lethal, transforming defeat into terrible resolve. Hannibal, the master of battlefield maneuver, finds himself gradually cornered, his supplies dwindling, his allies wavering, his strategic options narrowing with each passing season. His Carthaginian masters, too cautious, too divided by political factions, never commit the reinforcements that might have converted tactical brilliance into strategic conquest. The conqueror becomes the isolated, a predator slowly starved. Ultimately, it is not Roman swords that undo him, but time, political abandonment, and Rome's ferocious metamorphosis. When Scipio brings war to African shores, Hannibal is recalled to defend a homeland he barely knows, fighting with diminished resources against a Rome now wielding his own tactical innovations. Hunted across continents after Carthage's fall, treated as both living legend and existential threat, he seeks refuge in foreign courts until, at last, cornered and betrayed, he drinks poison rather than adorn a Roman triumph. His final moments mirror his legacy, calculating to the end, unflinching, defiant of fate itself. Yet Cannae's bloody lesson transcends his mortal span, rippling through centuries of military thought, shaping Napoleon's envelopment at Austerlitz, informing Schlieffen's grand design in 1914, even guiding modern generals who study battlefield geometry through digital simulations. And in that quiet field near the Adriatic, where tall grasses whisper over forgotten bones, you can still sense it if you stand still. The ghostly thunder of hooves, the desperate press of shields, the cold brilliance of genius transmuting death into immortality. One afternoon, 50,000 souls extinguished, and in their echoing silence, a question that haunts military academies still. How did one mind, in one perfect moment, nearly unmake an empire built for eternity? In every generation, there exists a moment so precise in its violence, so absolute in its consequences, that it transcends history to become eternal warning. Cannae is not merely a battle etched in stone or scroll, it is a mirror reflecting the darkest potential of human ambition, pride, and the merciless margins of genius. It teaches no comforting lesson, instead posing a terrible question. What happens when the most dangerous man alive is also the most brilliant? Hannibal's silence in death resonates more profoundly than any Roman triumph, for it reminds us that power without wisdom is never secure, that empires carved in marble can bleed just as freely as the flesh they conquer. We mark anniversaries, erect monuments, dissect tactics in war colleges, yet we cannot truly forget. Because beneath every modern military maneuver, behind the clinical precision of missiles and drones, lies the haunting specter of that Carthaginian crescent, closing like a noose around Roman throats. The soil of Cannae may appear peaceful now, but its truth remains restless, coiled and breathless in the minds of commanders who mistake overwhelming force for invulnerability. Perhaps in one forgotten Roman helmet, buried beneath centuries of indifferent earth, there remains a single tooth, clenched in that final moment of horrifying clarity, a fragment of the deadliest afternoon in history, still whispering its terrible lesson. Beware the adversary who fights not with mere strength, but with patience, terrain, psychology, and the devastating power of silence. And so, the imprint of Cannae endures not in abstract theory, but in blood and steel across millennia. In 1940, as German panzers execute their lightning encirclement of French forces through the Ardennes, commanders study Hannibal's formation with reverent precision. In 1991, when coalition forces bend Iraqi Republican Guard units into a devastating pocket in the deserts of Kuwait, generals invoke Cannae in war rooms, while Apache helicopters become Hannibal's cavalry. In Ukraine, modern tacticians plot double envelopments using satellite imagery and drone footage, the technology evolving while the geometry of slaughter remains eerily constant. Even in naval warfare and aerial combat, The principles of Cannae manifest in three dimensions, its deadly efficiency transcending terrain. Military academies worldwide dissect every moment of that afternoon with clinical obsession, each generation convinced they've finally mastered its lessons, each generation vulnerable to the same fatal trap when their certainty calcifies into arrogance. For Cannae represents not merely tactical innovation, but the eternal vulnerability of power, the horrifying moment when overwhelming force discovers itself caught in the jaws of superior intellect. Perhaps this is Hannibal's most devastating legacy. Not the thousands who perished that afternoon, not even Rome's traumatic transformation, but this inescapable haunting across time, the knowledge that with sufficient genius, patience, and psychological insight, any empire, any superpower, any force believing itself invincible can be brought to its knees between sunrise and sunset, their supremacy evaporating like blood mist under the merciless Mediterranean sun. The plain at Cannae bears no grand memorial, no towering monument inscribed with 50,000 names. It needs none. History itself has constructed the monument, not from marble, but from whispered reverence and primal dread. This legacy pulses in every cautious general who hesitates before committing forces, in every strategist who weighs confidence against hubris, in every commander who searches terrain for hidden purpose. It lives within us all, shapers and inheritors of a world forged in that single afternoon of blood, whether we acknowledge it or not. For Cannae transcended mere battle, Hannibal exceeded mere generalship. Together they revealed civilization-altering truths. What supreme brilliance can achieve when perfectly focused? What collective arrogance can surrender in hours? What happens when thousands of men discover too late they are not participants in glory, but components in someone else's lethal calculation? The bones of 50,000 Romans remain entangled beneath fertile Italian soil, their skeletal fingers still clutching useless weapons, their silence pregnant with warning. They teach us that in warfare, the gravest threat is never the army visible across the field, but the mind you cannot see, cannot measure, cannot predict. As the scorched dust of that ancient afternoon finally settles across millennia, one question burns with urgency, undiminished by time, haunting modern war rooms and command centers as it once haunted Roman survivors, trembling in the shadow of annihilation. What unforeseen shape will genius take when it next goes to war, and who among us has the wisdom to recognize it before it is too late? Because what Hannibal authored at Cannae was not just a massacre, not merely a victory painted in crimson and genius. It was a blueprint for annihilation etched in flesh rather than ink. It forced Rome to reconstitute its very identity, compelling generals across millennia to walk battlefields calculating not simply strength of arms, but psychological vulnerabilities. The ripple of Cannae flows through time, a current no empire has ever fully escaped. This lesson does not perish with the fallen. It waits in military doctrine, in the weighted silence before engagement, in that crucial pause when commanders contemplate commitment of forces. It whispers that beneath every uniform, behind every standard and technological advantage, lurks the possibility of encountering another mind like Hannibal's, calculating, patient, unforgiving, seeing vulnerabilities invisible to others. Cannae is not confined to history, because Cannae transcends mere battle to become eternal warning. And warnings unheeded do not fade into academic footnotes. They return as catastrophe. They erupt in the moment. Arrogance blinds us to brilliance on the opposing hill. So remember Cannae not as a dusty footnote in military history, but as a merciless mirror reflecting our own hubris, a battlefield where time collapsed and the gods themselves fell silent before mortal brilliance. In one punishing afternoon, Hannibal Barca did more than destroy an army. He exposed the vulnerable sinew beneath Rome's seemingly impenetrable armor, forcing an empire to survive long enough to learn from its own blood. The lesson, if it lives at all, lives in the marriage of tactical innovation with psychological insight, in power tempered by humility, ingenious unshackled from convention, yet disciplined by patience. Every commander who dares believe superior numbers guarantee victory ought to walk Cannae in their mind before ordering advance. Walk it slowly through choking dust, feel the scorching heat against skin, smell the metallic rot of 10,000 opened bodies, hear the final terrified gasps of men dying upright, too compressed even to fall. For on that sun-baked plain in the heart of Italy, the fundamental nature of warfare was redrawn not in ink, but in bone and silence, creating a template of destruction whose geometry still shapes conflicts across continents, whose whispered warning still haunts the calculations of generals who never fully escape its shadow. In the end, we do not commemorate Cannae for the tactics alone, but for the timeless truth it exposed about human conflict. Intellect, honed by necessity and fueled by vengeance, can unmake armies and forever alter history's course in a single blood-drenched afternoon. Hannibal's legacy lives not through triumphal monuments or completed conquests, but in the visceral dread that seizes every commander confronting an adversary too cunning to anticipate, too methodical to detect until destruction unfolds. His genius endures beyond academic study. It resonates in the Italian earth itself, where phantom legionaries eternally march into oblivion they never imagined possible. The testimony of 50,000 corpses speaks with brutal clarity across millennia. Power breeds blindness, superiority fosters complacency, and even the mightiest empire can shatter against a mind that perceives not merely formations and numbers, but the psychological vulnerability of its opponent. This remains Hannibal's ultimate victory, transcending battlefield success, forcing history to remember not Rome's eventual survival, but how completely, perfectly, and terrifyingly it was devastated on that single merciless day when tactical brilliance transformed into slaughter so absolute it still echoes in our strategic consciousness, a warning whispered through the ages. And though time has buried the screams beneath centuries of silence, Cannae remains restless in our collective consciousness. It pulses through modern military doctrine, lurking beneath digital simulations and satellite imagery. Instructors at war colleges trace its formations with reverent fingers. Generals invoke its strategies in contemporary conflicts. Yet the most essential truth remains terrifyingly simple. Human lives can be calculated, encircled, and extinguished with mathematical precision by those who see beyond brute strength. Arrogance does not merely invite defeat. It manufactures annihilation. Minds forged in adversity and driven by unshakable purpose can orchestrate devastation that transcends generations. Hannibal's name endures not because he ultimately prevailed, but because for one scorching afternoon, he revealed what it means to lose everything without comprehending why until the blood already soaks the earth. This remains Cannae's most haunting legacy, not the countless bones beneath Italian soil, not the statistics in historical accounts, but the terrible silence that follows when genius has spoken and empire has no answer, when brilliance leaves power naked and vulnerable in its final moment of clarity. That silence still lingers across battlefields worldwide, patient and eternal, waiting for the next commander who mistakes overwhelming force for inevitable victory. So Cannae stands not merely as history's cautionary tale, but as our perpetual reckoning. In classrooms, we diagram it clinically. In command centers, we dissect its geometry, but only through visceral confrontation with its horror do we grasp its fundamental truth. Human conflict is not decided by courage or might alone, but by that rarest weapon, clarity amid chaos. Hannibal, commanding no empire, with dwindling resources and distant masters, redefined warfare's possibilities through insight tempered in adversity. He remains not just a phantom haunting military academies, but a testament to intellect's capacity to overcome overwhelming power. And somewhere beneath those sun-scorched fields of Apulia, among silent bones and rusted iron, persists the resonance of a mind that, in one merciless afternoon, altered history's trajectory not through mere survival, but by revealing with surgical precision how empires can be unmade. That resonance waits patiently, inexhaustibly, for the next power believing itself invincible, the next commander certain of victory, the next conflict where arrogance blinds combatants to the shadow of genius gathering on distant hills.